Hey guys, in today's video you will learn the story of Nathan Carter, a man who died for a few minutes, and had an encounter with Jesus, who revealed a shocking secret about Holy Communion, something that no one preaches, but that could change his eternal destiny. What he saw on the other side will give you goosebumps. So leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which city you are watching, because this message needs to reach the entire world. Now get ready. This revelation will shake everything you believed. My name is Nathan Carter. I'm 53 years old. I grew up in Texas in a Christian house, one of those where the Bible was always on the shelf, but it was rarely opened with a hunger for truth. And even so, I followed the path. I accepted Jesus, was baptized, attended church, played the guitar in the praise ministry, and, of course, I participated in hundreds of holy suppers. But what I'm going to tell you now, no one ever prepared me for this. I was never told what really happens when you sit at the Lord's table. I was never told there was something hidden behind that bread and that cup, something serious, sacred, spiritual, dangerous, and I needed to die to understand. That day I was alone at home. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, one of those ordinary days. I was trying to pray, except, to be honest, my prayer was a sequence of ready-made sentences. Like a password I've memorized for years, there was no weight, there were no tears, just routine. And it was there, in that silent room, with the Bible closed beside me and my heart equally closed inside my chest, that everything happened. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, a sudden dizziness. I tried to get up, but everything was spinning. I felt my body freeze. The heart stopped. I knew. At that moment, I knew I was dying. But what came after? No one will ever convince me that it was just a hallucination. It was as if my body had turned to dust and my soul light. I floated. I saw myself down there lying on the living room floor, and suddenly, everything around me has transformed. Time stopped. Space disappeared. A wind that wasn't wind, a light that wasn't light, enveloped me completely. I was in another dimension, a place without sound, without ceiling, without end. But there was a presence. Santa, imposing. It burned without touching me. And that's when he appeared. Jesus. But not like in paintings or films, not with linen clothes and soft look. He was pure glory. A presence that made everything inside me tremble. And without moving your lips, without saying a word, he revealed something to me that destroyed everything I thought I knew about faith. And yes, it had to do with the Holy Supper. I was before him, and nothing in me could fake it. There were no more masks, no excuses, no amount of Sunday religiosity could protect me there. Jesus looked at me, without anger, but with a pain that burned more than any judgment. And then, out of nowhere, the environment started to change. It was as if the spiritual ground I was on transformed into something even more sacred. A table appeared, giant, infinite, covered by a white cloth that seemed to be made of light. But it wasn't a supper as I knew it. There was no bread, no wine, no people sitting. It was a living table, and on it, every time I participated in Holy Communion here on earth, it was recorded as if they were scenes being projected before me. I saw myself, sitting in the church pew, head down, eyes closed, but inside, empty. And then came the first stab in the soul. Jesus spoke, not with sound, but with truth that invaded the spirit. You thought you were just remembering, but you were being examined. That crushed me. I watched, as in a spiritual film, the times I approached the Lord's table with hidden sin, the times I took the cup with unconfessed sorrows, the times I pretended to be sorry just to not look weird in front of the other brothers. And each of these times had eternal spiritual weight. It was as if that heavenly table were an altar of judgment, and I, without knowing it, had entered it countless times without the slightest fear. Jesus looked at me, and I felt it. He didn't want to condemn me, but I couldn't ignore the truth. Supper is the place where heaven observes who really belongs to me, and many like you have eaten from my table with their hearts far away. That sentence destroyed everything inside me. The table that I thought was just a pretty symbol was actually a spiritual portal of alliance, a place where the spirit appears before the throne with its soul naked. And I never understood that. But the spiritual world always understood. And every time I approached supper with indifference, there were invisible consequences that I never imagined. He then showed me other people, hundreds, thousands, believers like me, in the church, with the Bible in hand, taking bread, drinking, the wine. But spiritually, they were condemning themselves. And Jesus whispered in my soul, "They think they are participating in a ritual, but they are going to court." In that instant, everything I thought I knew collapsed, and holy fear invaded every part of my being. Holy Communion is not what we were taught. She is a divider of destinies, and I almost lost mine. I was shaking, not with the body, because there I no longer had a body. It was my soul, my spirit, every fragment of my being, shuddering. The Lord's table was a living altar, and the blood still spoke. Yes, that blood, the same one that I so often celebrated at supper with an automatic prayer, it was there, in front of me, talking to the sky. And he wasn't just talking about what Jesus did. It talked about what I did with what he did. It was as if every time I drank the cup, something was registered in the spiritual world. A yes, or a no, a pact, or a hoax. And in that invisible court, where there is no corrupt judge, no lie permitted, I was faced with the question no one has ever asked me out loud. Did you discern the body, or did you just follow protocol? You never discriminates, nada. I just knew it was supper time. He lowered his head. He closed his eyes. I repeated phrases that I had heard my whole life. "Forgive my sins, Lord." But no pain, no conscience, no real brokenness. It was as if I was trying to pass through a spiritual detector with a suitcase full of pride, unhealed wounds, and a facade of faith. And the scariest thing? Every time I did this, and the sky saw. Jesus then took me to a place that looked like a spiritual hall. There, as in an eternal archive, were memories. The spiritual memories of the supper. And I saw, with the eyes of my soul, scenes of mine. Me sitting in church, judging people. Yes, judging. Noticing someone's clothes, criticizing someone else's behavior, condemning in your heart, and still, going to the table. It was as if the chalice itself was shouting, "You are lying with your body what your heart denies with every beat." And Jesus showed me something I will never forget. He stretched out his hand, and in it, the chalice appeared, but the cup was cracked. And he said, "This is the cup of the covenant, but you have been drinking without a wedding ring." The impact of those words was like thunder in eternity. I understood there that supper is not a memory, it's a pact. And when you enter into that covenant without reverence, you're not just being religious, you are becoming a defendant. And then, faced with that revelation, something inside me screamed, "Jesus, forgive me, I didn't know, I didn't understand." But he answered, sadly and firmly, "You knew, it was written, but you never wanted to see." It was at that moment that I realized spiritual ignorance does not come from lack of information. It comes from refusing to humble yourself. And Holy Supper, as beautiful as it may seem, it becomes dangerous when it is lived without fear. That chalice, cracked, silent, accused my soul. And I knew, if I hadn't had the chance to see it, I would have gone on with my life thinking I was saved, but condemned by the false communion itself. That spiritual hall was not empty. As I absorbed the pain of the truth about me, my eyes, or whatever my perception was in that dimension, began to open even wider. And then I saw crowds. Yes, crowds of people, men, women, young people, elderly, everyone dressed as if they were in a service, as if they were going to participate in Holy Communion. But there was no peace on their faces. There was confusion, there was weight, there was emptiness. They walked as if they knew the way, but his eyes were blindfolded. And then I understood. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just my story. Jesus was showing me a spiritual epidemic, the multitude of those who they drink without knowing. People who attend churches raise their hands, sing praises. But when they sit down at the table, they approach with a dirty, distracted fake heart. And the sky sees everything. They think they are participating in a symbol, but they are being heavy. That's what Jesus said to me with a pain that permeated everything in me. There, in front of that vision, I felt something I had never felt before. A pain that wasn't mine. It was his. It was as if Christ himself cried when he saw so. Many people repeating what I did, treat the holiest moment of worship as if it were part of the script. I saw pastors who smiled at the church, but inside they no longer felt anything. I saw young people who participated to not embarrass themselves. I saw brothers who were in sin, but who said to themselves, God understands, it's just another supper. And the entire sky, silent, observing, weighing, recording. At that time, the scene changed. Jesus took me before a table very different from the one I knew. It was a heavenly table, but on her, there were wounds. Yes, wounds. And each one represented the times that he was ignored, trivialized, betrayed within the moment of supper. They say they remind me, but they don't even recognize me. These words of Jesus broke me in ways I never thought possible. I cried. I cried without a body. I cried with my soul. And in the midst of that pain, Jesus approached, and it showed an image that I will never forget. It was me, returning from supper at the last service, closing your eyes, wiping your mouth with a tissue, smiling at a brother on the next bench. But in the spiritual world, I was standing before him, with my hands dirty with religiosity. I had not participated in Holy Communion. I had committed desecration. The supper there revealed itself as a divide between those who live by appearance and those who live by the cross. And then Jesus spoke, and each word was like a seal burning in my soul. They drink the wine, but they reject the blood. They eat the bread, but they don't want to die like I died. There I realized, the gospel has never been about ritual. It was always about delivery, and the supper is where this truth is tested. Up until that moment, everything I had seen was shocking. But then, Jesus did something that completely changed my perception of the supper, something that ripped the last thread of spiritual ignorance from me. He held out his hands, and in doing so, a veil was torn in the environment where we were. Literally, as if there were an invisible cloth separating two dimensions. On the one hand, what I and millions of Christians saw during the service. On the other, what really happened in the spiritual world when the supper was celebrated. And Nathan, on this side. I shut up. It was like attending a heavenly judgment disguised as a liturgy. I saw the angels watching each person who approached the table. I saw books being opened, not symbolic books, but real records, eternal. And there was written the state of each participant's heart. People who, in human eyes, were exemplary, but that before the sky, they were like intruders at the king's table. Supper is a spiritual door. Whoever enters it without regret enters a place that demands holiness. Jesus said, and his words exploded like lightning inside me. I understood that as we approach supper, we are not just remembering Jesus. We are entering an eternal court where the blood itself examines us. And then the Lord showed me three things. The bread of surrender. The bread we receive at supper, it does not just represent the broken body of Jesus. He represents our willingness to also be broken, to die to ego, to pride, to appearance. and whoever eats without that intention is lying before the sky. 2. The cup of the covenant. Wine is not just memory, it's a contract. It's as if each sip signs a renewal of covenant with God. But who takes the cup with hidden sin, with hurt, with judgment? You are signing falsely. The table as an altar. A fire in the spiritual dimension, the supper. It's not a dining table, it's an altar. And at every altar, either the sacrifice is accepted, or it is rejected. And I saw people leaving the service thinking that it was just another holy supper, when in eternity, it had been an act of judgment. At this point, I couldn't even look at Jesus. I was in pieces. Each symbol of the supper, which I once saw as a pretty formality, was now a portal, a mirror, a spiritual battlefield. And I realized I had desecrated that altar for years, thinking I was being faithful. You betrayed me with false reverence, he said, and it wasn't just once, it was many. That went through me, and for the first time, I wished he would rebuke me in anger. But Jesus didn't scream. He cried, and in his crying, there was the urgency of heaven for an entire generation that approaches the table without fear. I thought I'd seen the worst. I thought that pain, that shame, and that spiritual cry were already the bottom of the well of my soul. But no. Jesus still had something to show me, something that made my spirit scream in silence. He pointed to the crowd, the same one I had seen before, walking blindfolded towards the table. But now, each person had something marked on their forehead. It was invisible to natural eyes, but in that place, glowed like fire. Some had the mark of alliance, others had the mark of mockery. "Sir, what is this?" my soul asked, as if begging not to hear the answer. And Jesus responded with a tone that mixed sadness and justice. "Those who attend my table with true repentance are marked by my blood. But those who mock the covenant with religiosity, hypocrisy, and hidden sin mark themselves." I saw familiar faces, people I admired, people I called men and women of God. But before the eyes of the Lamb, they were marked as someone who participated in a sacrifice and without the fear of someone who understands the price. I saw a lady I remembered from church, always elegant, always with soft words. But Jesus showed me her heart, full of pride, of judgment, of criticism, against everyone around her. And yet there she was, eating the bread as if she were worthy. She never forgave, but she never stopped participating in the supper. Her brand is not mine, it's her own. Those words chilled me. And then I saw myself, and there it was, the same brand. It was not a curse cast by God, it was the result of a repeated choice, Sunday after Sunday, to fake. Perform a ritual, sitting at the table with a heart that God couldn't recognize. Jesus looked at me firmly. There was no anger in his eyes, but there was justice, and justice that cannot be ignored. The supper is where true children are discerned, and many are eating and drinking curses thinking they are just getting emotional in a cult. I fell. I fell before him, not physically, but spiritually, not out of fear, but out of shame, for finally seeing what religiosity had blinded me to for years. And there, on that spiritual ground where no pride can stand, I screamed without a sound, "Lord, what do I do now? Is there a chance for me?" The silence that came next was the most terrifying of the entire experience. But what came next was even more surprising. The question still echoed inside me. "Sir, is there a chance for me?" I was prostrate, torn, ruined inside. There was no defense. There were no arguments. Only a man who had lived a decorated faith. And now he saw himself naked in front of eternity. The silence continued, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was like heaven itself was weighing every word of my soul. And then finally, Jesus approached. I did not see him as before, with distant glory and flaming majesty. Now he seemed close, so close that it was as if my spirit was enveloped in light, and in a voice that I will never forget, that was steady as thunder and sweet as a father, he said, "Nathan, I didn't bring you here to condemn you. I brought you to wake you up." These words, they broke something that was still left inside me. It was as if a spiritual rock cracked in the center of my soul. I cried like I had never cried before, not with my eyes, but with the essence of my being. You made fun of my table, yes. You have become accustomed to the sacred. But I heard, I saw, and yet, I waited for you. At that moment, the scenario changed again, and Jesus showed me a cruise, but not the image we see in paintings or films. It was the living cross, the actual place of delivery, from the blood, from pain, of victory. And he said to me, "The supper is the echo of the cross." Every time someone approaches her, they are saying, "I understand what happened here." But when they say this, without truth, they become defendants of what they pretend to honor. I was shaking. The truth was unbearable. But along with her, mercy came. Jesus showed me all the times the Holy Spirit tried to warn me, in services, in prayers, in small worries before supper. But I resisted. I said to myself, "It's not that serious." Era. And then Jesus said something that changed me forever. The problem is not the error. The problem is pride that prevents repentance. At that moment I saw it wasn't too late, because I was there, because I was watching, because he allowed me to live the truth that I always avoided. And then, with his hands outstretched, Jesus showed me something that seemed simple, but what exploded inside me. The supper as it really is. I saw an altar. I saw a lamb. I saw the blood. And I saw a broken heart in the face of all this. That's what I hope, not perfection, but true, broken hearts, before a God who gave himself whole. That was the moment I understood. The supper is not about me. It's about him, and how willing I am to die with him, to live with him. And in that moment, for the first time in decades of faith, I converted. In truth, the revelation was overwhelming, but the mercy was even greater. There, on that eternal altar, Jesus looked at me like someone looking at a son who has finally woken up. There was no more accusation. There was purpose. "Nathan, you will come back." Those words stopped me. To go back? I couldn't believe it. After everything he showed me, after my coldness, my religiosity, my silent betrayal at his table, he still wanted to give me back life? Yes, but not like before. I wasn't coming back as the same man who died. I was returning with a mission engraved in my soul. Jesus approached, and his presence was now a gentle fire. It burned, but it healed. It played, but restored. And then he handed me something. Not with my hands. It was like a spiritual seal being imprinted inside me. It was a calling, a scream, an urgency. They don't know yet. Many of mine have not yet discerned the supper. They think they are remembering the cross, but they didn't understand that they were in front of her. They think it's a symbolic moment, but they are touching the invisible. The mission was clear. Awaken those who are sleeping in faith. Warn those who play with the sacred. Cry out for those who sit at the table without knowing that it is fire and not ceremony. Jesus continued, "Go back and tell them, the supper is not a memorial. It's a summons. It is a place of death for those who want life, a place of renunciation for those who desire salvation." At that moment, images began to emerge around me. churches, pulpits, people kneeling, and others standing, distracted, using their cell phones, whispering. And I saw in the face of all this, the Lord's table being spread out, not physically, but spiritually. And Jesus showed me something even deeper. Many participate in the supper, but they do not recognize me, because they do not recognize themselves before me. Therefore, they are not transformed. They leave the cult the same way. They leave with hardened hearts because they didn't find me. They only participated in a ritual. Those words burned me. How many times have I been one of those myself? How? Many times did I sing, cry, and come home the same, because I never let supper undress me. I never let the cross break me. I never allowed bread and wine to become a mirror of my soul. And now, I knew. And because of that, I could no longer remain silent. Volte, Nathan, home, scream if you have to. Because there are many, many who still think they are saved, but they are sentencing themselves every time they touch what is holy with dirty hands. The mission was recorded, and time was running out. After Jesus gave me that call, something inside me changed definitively. Eternity was no longer a distant concept. It was real as my living room floor. And then I felt time pulling me back. Not like someone waking up from a dream, but like someone who is torn from a place where they wanted to stay. Because there, I was alive for the first time. But the mission called me. And Jesus told me something that echoes in my bones to this day. Don't come back as a survivor. Come back like a trumpet, because many will mock, but some will listen. At that moment, the surrounding light began to recede. It didn't turn off, retreated, as if the sky were slowly closing again. And with it, that supernatural peace, that invisible reverence, that certainty that I had seen the heart of God. The sound that came next cut me to the core. A beep, a smell of alcohol, a distant voice. He's back. We have a heartbeat. My eyes opened, but they didn't feel like mine. My body felt heavy. My chest hurt. Tubes, wires, devices. I was in the hospital. Doctors ran. A nurse was screaming for help. But I just cried. He cried not out of pain nor out of fright. I cried because I knew I had come back with something that the world wouldn't understand. In the days that followed, I recovered physically. But spiritually, I walked like a foreigner, as if I had returned from an invisible war that no one knew existed. I spoke to my pastor. He listened, but was uncomfortable. He said maybe it was just an after-death experience. And he advised me not to spread it too much, so as not to confuse the new converts, according to him. I spoke to my wife. She cried, but he didn't seem to know if it was emotion or worry. And then I understood. Not everyone is ready to listen at the table, because many are still sitting in it, asleep. That's when I bought a black notebook, and I started writing every word I heard, every image I saw, every instruction Jesus gave me, not for me, but for those who still have time, for those who still go to church every week, thinking that communion is just a beautiful moment, when, in fact, it is Christ himself observing the state of your soul. I knew some would laugh. Others would doubt it. But if just one person woke up, it would have been worth it. And now, I was preparing to complete the last part of the mission. Speak to the world. Donate to anyone who hurts, whatever it takes. Today I am here, alive, breathing, but actually as dead to everything I was before. The experience I had was not a warning just for me. It was a decree from heaven, an urgent call, a muffled scream, among church pews, in beautiful services and rehearsed liturgies. The Lord's Supper is not what we were taught. It's not just a memorial. She is a mirror, an altar, a silent trial before the throne. I saw people smiling in worship, and being marked spiritually. I saw cold hearts touching what is holy, and you, the Lamb, crying. If you think it's enough to close your eyes and repeat a prayer, if you think that taking the bread and the cup is just a memory of an ancient act, you need to wake up, because Jesus is alive, and he is still at the table, looking, judging, waiting. Today, every time I participate in the supper, my hands shake, my heart burns, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because now I know, the chalice that I hold weighs, the bread I eat demands surrender. Supper is not for the perfect, she is for the repentant. But regret is not a light feeling, it is a profound surrender, a nakedness of the soul before the cross. Since that experience, I have never been the same. I started to look at my church with different eyes. I began to discern in the Spirit who was truly broken, and who was there just to comply with the schedule. And you know what scares me most? It's just that there are many of us, too religious, broken from less. We talk about the cross, but we don't carry ours. We talk about blood, but we don't want to die to ourselves. And when it's time for supper, we think it's just another part of the cult. But in heaven, it is the moment when the books are opened. It is the moment when everyone's heart is heavy. This is when the King observes who really understood what he did. If you're listening to this, maybe there's still time for you, like there was for me. But don't joke, don't cover your spiritual ears. Supper is not a symbol. It is a declaration of war against everything that is false within us. And only those who come with truth, with repentance, with a torn soul, they participate at the table like children. Others are judging themselves, and many don't even realize it. I died, and I discovered this too late, but Jesus brought me back, and now you know. So, what are you going to do with this truth? If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.